recording. All right, everyone. Welcome to today's class. Launch a chart topping podcast from your living room. I am your host, Michaela Matthews Okome. I am also the host of the Side Hustle Pro podcast, and I've always podcasted from home. I want to make sure that people know that you can build a thriving podcast and podcast business right from the comfort of your own home. So that's the whole goal of today's class. I'm going to share with you everything that I did and the exact methods that I teach people to get started. So, a little bit about me. Why I teach podcasting is because in 2016, like I said, I launched my own podcast, Side Hustle Pro. It's a hit podcast, launched in the top charts in business. And since I launched in 2016, I've gone on to amass over 10 million downloads, and I earn multiple six figures in sponsorship alone each year. While I was podcasting, I was side hustling. I started my podcast as a side hustle. At the time, I was working full time at NPR, National Public Radio. And there I led the digital marketing for top podcasts like How I Built This, Code Switch, many of your favorites. And overall, I have over 15 years of experience as a marketer. So that's just to give you guys a little background in case you're like just saw an ad and you have no idea who I am and never heard my name before. So that's Nikayla in a nutshell. And fun fact, well, it wasn't so fun at the time. I was unemployed when I got the idea for my podcast. I had just graduated with my MBA, but I did not have a full time job. I was living in DC at the time, really trying to figure out my next move. So I, like many of you might be sometimes, I went into soul searching mode. I said, I have got to figure this out. And while I was searching for jobs and applying every single day, I said, let me just start blogging. It's something that I'd done in the past. I enjoyed it. And I just thought it would be a good way for me to showcase to employers my skills in marketing, writing, and all these different skills that I wanted to be employed for. So I start blogging, right? And after a while, I start really gravitating to interviews and interviewing my friends about their side hustles. And that's how the idea for Side Hustle Pro podcast was born. I launched my podcast in my living room, and then I moved it over to the bedroom. And now, currently, I podcast from my son's bedroom closet. It's a tight fit, but it works. And by the way, ironically enough, I just got featured in an article on curb.com about my closet. So this is actually a screenshot from that if you want to go look it up. Not right now, after our class. So I thought that was so funny. Who would have thunk it? So shortly after I launched my podcast, I started studying podcast monetization because after I'd gone through that process of being unemployed so long and getting rejection after rejection, I decided that I did not want to rely on an employer anymore. I wanted to be able to work for myself eventually. I didn't know when it would happen, but I just really felt, you know what, one day I want to have the flexibility to work for myself and to never have to ask someone else when I could take vacation or when I can come in to work and start my work day. Like I was over it. So I said, let me figure out how people make money as podcasters, especially independent podcasters. So I invested some money. I invested $1,197 in an event producer's course. And I did that to learn how to pitch sponsors. So even though it wasn't podcast specific, I figured, okay, I can get to know how to pitch sponsors and it's got to be helpful, right? So I did that. And after that, 6 months after launching the podcast, I pitched my very first cold sponsor, meaning I didn't know anyone at the company. I just got an email off the internet and sent that email. And I earned my first $4,000 in podcast money, podcast sponsorship money from that one email. So my wheels started turning. And that's really the moment where I realized, all right, I can do this. I can earn money from this. And if I can earn money from this, I can make a living from this. And eventually I'll be able to quit. And how did we get here, guys? Oops, sorry. Hold on. Let me unshare for a second. We are jumping ahead. Canva is jumping ahead. Hang on one second. So while we hang on, I'll just tell you that While I was still working at NPR, I started to realize that, all right, if I keep on working at this, I could earn money, I could save, and I could figure out how to do this full time. And so that's exactly what I started to do. I started to pitch more sponsors, right? It became a numbers game to me. On my lunch break, I would go out, I would go to a cafe on my lunch break. I would go to cafes after work too. And I would just have a bunch of emails that I was pitching, because I knew that if I pitch 100 sponsors a week, even if only 10% reply to me, and from that 10%, 20%, and I end up landing 20%, that could be a $4,000, $5,000 contract. And that is all that I needed. So I said, all right, I'm going to do that. So I did that. So again, I got my first $4,000 podcast sponsorship contract about 6 months after launching. I launched in June 2016. I got my first check in December 2016. And then a whole year later, in December 2017, I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. And I know some of you might be like, whoa, 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 Nikayla, that's so fast. Like, how in the world? No way. So I wanted to just show you a timeline to break it down a little bit more so you know, like, this is what I was doing and how I was grinding. So again, 2015, unemployed, graduated with no job, started a blog, applied for jobs, ended up getting a job at NPR that December. All of 2016, I was still side hustling though, because it had taken me so long to get a job. I knew I was never going to I was never going to depend on one employer ever again. So I kept my side hustle. So, tip for you guys, as you podcast, and if you have to choose between one thing or the other, find a way to keep a side hustle. So, 2016, I launched my podcast, grew my podcast, studied podcasting and podcast monetization, and pitched my first sponsor and landed my first $4,000 contract. Then 2017, I went after more sponsors. I tested more revenue streams, things like creating my own courses and programs, even merchandise. I tried all different things. And I saved that money, because the beauty of side hustling and the beauty of podcasting is you can keep your overhead costs very low. And that's why I advocate starting in your living room, because you can keep the costs very low so that whatever money you earn, you can save, you can invest a little bit to grow the show even more, but you really can stack away a lot of money. So if you choose to, like I did, you can quit your job to podcast full time, or you can just use your podcasting revenue to invest in another business or something else you want to do, more vacations, anything. So today, you'll see me here. I'm a full-time podcaster. It's 2024. I podcast from my closet still. I have work flexibility. I don't have to ask for PTO. And honestly, my options are endless, you guys. It's just so much fun doing what we're doing. So hold on, let me make sure this doesn't skip ahead. This is my first time really doing Canva slides. I usually do Google Slides, so you know, I bear with me. So, anywho, so I was able to launch and grow my podcast to this level using the exact methods that I teach inside of my program, Podcast Moguls. And today I thought, why don't I just teach like the first couple of like the intro lesson, right? I'm going to teach you exactly what I teach my students to lay the foundation for a successful podcast, because no matter where you are in the journey, this is what you should be thinking about before you go any further. So we'll go over step one, how to choose your podcast topic and name. So we'll go over the secrets to crafting a podcast theme and name that instantly captivates your audience. Step two, we'll go over how to find your perfect listener, that person who is going to really be your advocate, your ambassador, who helps to spread the word. And so I'll teach you how to identify this person with accuracy. And then finally, step three, we will get into how to record from anywhere. I'll show you the easy way that I record from anywhere with just my laptop and a microphone. So let's jump right into step one, how to choose your podcast topic and name. Number one, before you even choose anything, guys, you have to stop doing this. You have to stop keeping your podcast super broad so that you don't, quote unquote, put yourself in a box. All right. When you do that, when you keep yourself broad, your podcast looks as bland and boring as this icon, this podcast artwork that I put over here. I did that on purpose to show you like that. That's literally what people will then see as they're scrolling through the podcast apps. Like, oh, let me scroll over this because I don't know what it's just super generic. Right. And you should also stop doing this, which is starting a general conversation podcast with the homies and making your podcast title vague or a cute play on words, a play on your name, all of that stuff. And I'm going to tell you why. And by the way, I made this mistake. I'll show you. So that's why I know for certain that you don't want to do this. So here's what happens when you do these things. You make it very, very hard for people to find your show. And I always tell people, you can do what you want. You can name your show anything you want to, but you're not going to get found. And if you want to invest all this time working on your show only for it to be hard for people to find your show, so be it. Go ahead, go forth and conquer, do you. However, if you want to grow fast and if you really want to succeed in podcasting, listen to what I have to say. Don't make it hard for people to find your show when they're searching for the topics that your show discusses. And don't make it hard for people to know what your show is even about and that it is for them. So again, I made this mistake. I made this mistake myself. So I'm not getting down on y'all. I know what it's like to want to do a play on words. When I launched that blog that I told you guys about, when I did that, I called it Kayla K Speaks. The play on my first name, Nikayla. I thought it was cute. It wasn't. Nobody knew what the blog was about. They couldn't pronounce it. I used to write about all different stuff because I was just trying to get hired and I wanted to show my marketing analytical skills. But once I started to hone in on these interviews and the fact that I really enjoy learning from side hustlers, that's when it started to click. And that's when it became abundantly clear what my show is about so that other people could recognize that it was for them. So nowadays, when you see an episode from Side Hustle Pro podcast, it's telling you the arc of the guest, how, X guest did this, and it immediately lets people know, oh, learn more about how she went from a VP to a full-time entrepreneur. Oh, I've heard of Imani Ellis. She does CultureCon, right? So these are the kind of things that I teach my podcast mogul students, and I'm teaching you today so that you can make it easier for your show to go up the rankings because people know what it's about. This has also happened to many of my podcast mogul students. When they come into the program, they have shows that are named after them. It's a common mistake. So this was Erica and McAfee when she came into the program. Within her first few weeks, she had rebranded to Sisters in Loss because she has a podcast about sisters who have had pregnancy loss, and she talks about and has a community for people who have experienced this. So she not only includes sisters in loss in the title, but then she also has subtle nods to the community that she's serving. So that African print in the background underneath the yellow is like a subtle nod to that. And she still has her name on it. Like you can still include your name on the podcast logo, but just make sure your title is more clear. This is also another podcast mogul student. This is Lori Tharps. She came in with a blog. It was called My American Melting Pot. She loves that name. She loved the artwork that was created for the blog. But I'm sure all of you guys looking at it don't know what it's about, right? So she has since used the Podcast Moguls lessons and coaching to rebrand to Read, Write, and Create. And this, you'll learn a little bit later, attracts her perfect listener like you wouldn't believe. Why? Because she is attracting people who want to learn the service that she teaches, which is ghostwriting. So your title attracts people, and then your description and your episode titles are what really hooks them, because that's when they're able to see, oh, this show is what I think it's about, and I want to listen to this episode. So again, before My American Melting Pot, and then after Read, Write, and Create. So how do you choose or improve your podcast topic? Well, I want you to write down the answers to these questions. And I want to make sure we stay on time, you guys. So you can screenshot these slides, tag me over on Instagram at Side Hustle Pro if you want to, show me you were here. So let's go through these questions. Number one, what would you talk about if you were not making any money? Because we all know your podcast won't make money right away. Number two, what are you passionate about? Number three, what do you have a strong opinion on? Number four, what do you have unanswered questions about? Number five, what's your expertise? And number six, who do you want to impact and what do you want to be known for? So, after this class, I want you to sit with these questions and flesh out your answers and a note about things like what's your expertise? I'm not saying that if you're a doctor, you need to start a podcast about medicine. Your expertise could be something like, you know what? I am the most inquisitive person I know. That's me. I'm in that boat. I am the most inquisitive, aka nosy person I know. When I meet someone, I want to know how they got to be where they are. And so that is my expertise. And that's why I started an interview podcast. So think about not just what you do for a living, because too many of us define ourselves by what we do for a living, and think about who you are at your core. What do your friends say about you? What do people tell you you're really good at? So think about all of these things as you are answering the questions. Then step two, conduct market research. So once you have identified a topic or a few topics you're considering podcasting about, it's time to conduct your market research. And what I mean by that is you are going to write down your answers to these questions. What are the podcasts that are talking about your topic? So when it was me, I was looking at what other side hustle podcasts are out there. Is there a demand for this topic? If you see other people talking about your topic or things related to your topic, be encouraged rather than discouraged. That means, oh, there's a demand for this topic. Okay, so I can definitely see potential here, and I could just do a different spin on it, which is what I did. So step three is determine your unique lane, determine your unique value proposition and what you're bringing to the podcast table. And then write down your answers to these questions. So again, I hope I'm not going too fast, you guys. Do screenshot, okay? And again, tag me over on Instagram if you are screenshotting. So write down what are the names and angles of the other podcasts that address this topic. What are those other podcasts not talking about? With Side Hustle Pro, I knew that there were side hustle podcasts, but they were not talking to people who grew their side hustles into full-time businesses. A lot of them were talking about gig economy, things people just were doing as hobbies or to make a quick cash grab. And I wanted something else. So what can you talk about that no one else can? And why are you the perfect person to tackle this subject? Step four, evaluate if your idea will make a hit topic. So determine if this is a podcast that will attract interest right away. And what I mean by a hit topic is a topic that has an audience, is interesting and intentional, and tackles new ground. So let's break this down a little bit further. If something has an audience, as you perform competitive analysis, you will come across podcasts with similar topics. And instead of being discouraged, like I said, think of it as a good sign. That's a sign that a topic has an audience. So that's the H in hit. Then make sure that you have the I as well. So it's interesting and intentional. Be intentional in how you break down your topic and how you uncover new truths and present a unique angle that has not been explored before. And then finally, tackle new ground. This is where you use your unique lived experience and infuse your perspective into every episode. Explore what other podcasts are not exploring. Just by nature of you being on earth and living, you have a lens that no one else has. So don't shy away from that. Don't shy away from using your own curiosity and your own experience to inform your episodes. So again, the H is for, let me go back a little bit and take screenshots and tag me, guys. Has an audience. Hit I is interesting and intentional, and T tackles new ground. Step 5. Now let's evaluate the longevity potential of these topics, because that's another thing. For your show to be successful, you can't run out of steam. You can't run out of things to talk about. So before you get into this, you have to make sure you want to keep talking about this for years to come, and that you can keep talking about this for years to come. So determine if your podcast has staying power. Write down your answers to these questions. Will you be able to produce multiple episodes about the same topic? If this were a TV show, how many seasons would it have? 3, will you want to keep talking about this topic for years to come? And 4, is this a topic, a trend, or an evergreen subject matter? Again, to use Side Hustle Pro as an example, I knew I would be able to produce multiple episodes on this topic. I'm interviewing Black women entrepreneurs. There are plethora, never ending stories of Black women starting their businesses, starting as side hustlers. I knew I'd want to keep talking about this for years to come because I'm so passionate about this topic. And of course, it's not just a trend, because Black women have been starting businesses for centuries and will continue to start businesses. So, all of these questions I was able to answer and knew that I had longevity. What about you? Let me know in the chat. Are you guys coming up with um, things that have potential? Are you coming up with things that have longevity, or are you reevaluating um, what you might be naming your show or titling your show about? Let's get into names, by the way. Let's choose your podcast name. I saw someone put the name in the chat. I missed the name, but let's talk about this naming thing, because a lot of times they think they're coming up with a clever name. And let me tell you what is risky about clever names. So your podcast name should introduce your podcast. It should stand out in your category, and it should define your podcast before it gets defined by others. By the way, if you ever want to know what are podcast categories, open up the podcast app, whether that's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Scroll down to where it says browse, and there you'll see charts. You'll be able to click on categories, and it will show you things like business, health, careers, and all these different categories. So that's what I mean by, when you have a podcast, you'll have to select a category and you want it to stand out. So, key factors to keep in mind when it comes to your name: your podcast name should be memorable. Okay. And your perfect listener should know what your show is about based on the title. So, this is not the time to get creative with spelling, and only tell an inside joke if your perfect listener will understand that joke. And your title should also support search engine optimization. That means if someone is searching for what you talk about on your show, your title should have a chance of popping up there. If your show is about, walking, or if it's about, let's say, affirmations, or it's about health, and you name it something like, Lisa's Corner, that you're not giving your podcast a chance to stand out, because you like the name because it sounds cute and clever. But when people are searching for podcasts about affirmations or health or whatever it's about, you didn't even give your show a chance. So, key questions to ask yourself include: is your topic in the title? Will your perfect listener know what you're talking about, or do you need to give them a background story in order for them to get it? If you need to give anyone a background story for your title, it's time to consider. It's time to reconsider with that title, okay? Or consider adding a subtitle to make absolute sure that your perfect listener gets it. So here's how you select a subtitle. What words do you use to describe your show after you tell people the title? If you say, the name of my show is Lisa's Corner, it's about health and wellness for blah, 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 then think about that for the subtitle. And by the way, I'm just being really generic. Do not name your show Lisa's Corner, please. That is just not, that's not going to help you with growing your show. Okay, so here are some examples, because I know people always need to see things visually too. So here's some examples of how you keep the podcast topic in the title. Things like Online Marketing Made Easy. This is a podcast about, can you guess, online marketing, right? And then with Amy Porterfield tells you who it's by. So you can feel free to include your name, feel free to include a photo, but make sure that you are prioritizing what your show is about in order to help with discoverability, and also to help with growth. Um, Here's another podcast, one of my faves, Getting Grown. So, the perfect listener for Getting Grown honestly knows what it means when you hear the phrase getting grown. But just in case, and to make it even more discoverable, findable, searchable, lovable, they've added learning how to adult for real. Again, this speaks exactly to their perfect listener. That person knows exactly what they means when they say learning how to adult. So, you can start conversational podcasts, but make sure you know what the overarching umbrella is. And then finally, I include another example, my own podcast of having your podcast with the topic in the title, Side Hustle Pro. And then again, your name doesn't have to be so um what's the word? It doesn't have to be so literal that it literally says everything your show is about, but it should give a hint at the very minimum. And then with your description, your podcast description, and your episode titles, you you round out the picture for your perfect listener. You get it? Cool beans. All right. So now, speaking of that perfect listener, let's get into how to find this person, how to find that listener for your show so that your show will grow. First of all, what is a perfect listener? You're probably wondering, right? So a perfect listener is your ideal listener, your die-hard fan, your podcast ambassador who will rave about your podcast to others. In order to find this person, you need to do some more intimate research. This is how I went about starting my own show. So again, I'm sharing the exact methods I used. A lot of times people just start a show and they say, I want to talk to millennials. There's so many different types of millennials. There's so many different types of Gen Zs, or any generational group. You need to really be able to picture this person's name and face. So I always tell well, first of all, let me just share this a little bit further. So your perfect listener is more than their race, age, or occupation. Your perfect listener has goals, challenges, interests, and dreams. The things they are dealing with, the experiences they're having, and or the things they're interested in, they are finding use for that in your podcast. You are discussing these things on your podcast. So your perfect listener has a challenge basically that your podcast is the solution to. When you know who your perfect listener is, you know exactly which content to include in your podcast episodes because your content helps them to find answers, information, inspiration, and comfort. And when you know who your perfect listener is, you talk to them outside of the show. So you continue to get idea for podcast episodes. So what I want you to do is to actually get on the phone with 10 potential perfect listeners to tell them about your idea for your show or your show that already exists and learn more from them about the kind of topics they would want to hear about on the show. So, learn what kind of resources and tools would be useful, what other aspects your perfect listener finds valuable, which books they're reading, which other podcasts they're listening to, and more. And then after you have those calls, you're going to write your perfect listener profile. I'm getting ready to show you mine so you can see how exhaustive it is. So, this is Side Hustle Pro Podcast Perfect Listener. Again, feel free to screenshot. This is how granular I got when I was thinking about who is listening to the show. I knew her name, I knew where she lived. If you want me to get even more granular, I could give you the street. And this is not a real person, by the way. This is an amalgamation of the conversations I had and the feedback I was getting and what I knew about who would be attracted to this show. So I knew that this is a side hustler at her core, but she has a good job. And she's not just going to leave that job for any old side hustle. So she's the type of person who wants to cross every T, dot every I. And, I wrote that out there for you guys to see. And that doesn't mean that everyone who listens to Side Hustle Pro fits this profile. All it means is that I know who I'm creating content for. Everyone else is a secondary or tertiary listener. And oftentimes, those people who are not my perfect listener profile, who still love and enjoy the show, they know who it's for. And so they share it with a Janelle in their life. So that's what is so helpful about making your show shareable, making it clear who your content is for, because it helps more people to discover it, more people to tap other listeners who fit that profile. So before I get into how to record from anywhere, guys, I want to stop at the perfect listener phase. Remember to add your questions over in the Q&A part. Let me know if you guys can't see the Q&A though. I know sometimes Zoom likes to default and not allow that. And I forgot to turn it on. So give me a yes if you guys are have an idea of who your perfect listener might be. Yes. All right. Okay. She has your middle name. Nice. Nice. I love this. That's very encouraging. Okay. So then you need to start reaching out to people who might fit this profile. Oh, good. I see a Q&A question coming. So yeah, move your questions over to the Q&A so I can answer them after the call. Alrighty. So that was the perfect listener portion. So now I'm going to jump into how to record from anywhere. Again, I started my podcast in my living room, moved to my bedroom, and now still record from a closet in our home. Now, here's how I record from anywhere. You guys head over to sidehustlepro.co/riverside after this class. This is where I record my virtual interviews. And by the way, this is an affiliate link. You don't have to use my link, but this is just the easiest way to get there. So Riverside.fm is a platform that I love. I used to use all these different things, Skype and Ecamm, sometimes Zoom. And then once I discovered Riverside, my life was changed because here's what it does. It's an online recording studio that's built for podcasters. If you've been in the podcast game for a while, you know that a few of these have come about in over the years. Like there's Zencaster, and there are a couple of different places. Like they're always trying to build the best one. But what I love about this better than Zoom is it is created for you to record content. So once you go to Riverside FM, once you have an account set up, every time you log in, here's what it looks like. So this is the Side Hustle Pro podcast studio. It does a check for me. It says, let me check your cam and mic. It asks me if I'm using headphones, if I'm not using headphones. I always record with headphones just to minimize any chance that there's any sound issues, right? And then it allows you to select your camera. Usually FaceTime, if you're an Apple user, usually the FaceTime HD camera is default. So you have to make sure that if you use a webcam to record like I do, that camera is selected. And if you use a different microphone than your built-in MacBook Air microphone, you have to make sure that microphone is selected. And then when I'm using my headphones, which I'm always using, I make sure that those are selected for the speaker instead of the default. So love that it always makes sure that you go over your settings each and every time before you even go into the studio, the virtual studio. And then this is what it looks like when I'm recording with a guest. As you can see, we're able to see each other. Before I start recording, I'm able to tell them, hey, I'm hearing this, or do you have this? We do all the sound checks. You see on the screen, there's also a transcript. So what's good about these transcripts is you can actually edit. You can go exactly to where you want to edit in the episode. Instead of having to rewind and find it, you can just go through the transcript, and then you'll be able to go to that place, that marker in the episode, and just do whatever edits you need to do. And you can edit directly in the platform. So nowadays I use an external editor, but when I started my podcast journey, I was editing on my own, and I show my process for editing inside of Podcast Moguls too. But right now it's really like a one-stop shop inside of Riverside FM. So again, this is what I mean by you can literally search by the what you guys were talking about. Like if you know, oh, when she says that thing about her Harlem stoop, I wanted to edit out, or she started over, so I want to go and edit that. You can just search for stoop. You can just go through and perform the edits right there inside of the platform. And it really is that simple, you guys. That is how I record from anywhere. I can take my laptop and my mic. I can go to Jamaica. I can go to anywhere I want to record as long as I get a quiet room and make sure there's not a lot of sound going on. The smaller the room, the better, to kind of decrease the chances of there being echo or you just sounding like you're in an empty jar. But there's so many things you can use to support that. So I go over all of that in the equipment lesson. But yeah, it really is that simple. That's how I record. Let me know if any of you guys have heard of or use Riverside. Kendall says Riverside has made things easier for me. Oh, and by the way, thanks for bringing that up. You do not have to do audio. Excuse me. You do not have to do video inside of Riverside. I highly recommend everyone actually just start with audio. So you can record without video inside of Riverside. So, and then some folks like StreamYard as well. There are a lot of different options. I personally have just really enjoyed the seamlessness of this experience. So that's it. So guys, let me know if you enjoyed this class and if you'd like me to teach you more. How, I can teach you step by step how to launch, grow, and monetize your own podcast. I've been in the podcast game now for going on 8 years. Oh my God, 8 years. And I love, 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 love to teach people because podcasting has given me so much in life, the freedom to work from anywhere, the ability to provide for my family, the ability to come and go where and whenever I want, take vacation when we want. So uh, I'm so glad you guys found it great and helpful. So let me share a little bit more. If you're interested in learning more about how to keep on working with me, I want you to know that my Podcast Moguls program is currently open and I'm accepting students. And this is my coaching program where I teach my proven strategies to podcasters like yourself who want to have a hit podcast, grow an audience, and make money from their podcast. So if you are interested in starting or growing, this is the program for you. So I know you might be feeling many different ways right now. Some of you might be feeling overwhelmed where you want to get started and grow your show, but you're trying to do everything at once and you don't know where you're going to fit it in. Or you might be feeling stuck, like your podcast is at a plateau and it's not growing fast enough, or not getting enough downloads, and that the lack of that blueprint is holding you back. And then some of you might have come here just feeling determined. You know the value of having a powerful platform like a regular podcast, and you are ready to do what it takes to grow it. And I told you guys I would tell you about Podcast Mogul. So some of you are here to hear that. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more. So you have option one. You can keep trying to DIY this podcast thing with tips gathered all over social media and YouTube. And I love YouTube University myself, but let me tell you, the one drawback of it is that you don't know everyone's success stories. You don't know anyone can get up behind a mic and spew tips at you. But my record, my track record, my history, how much I've grown the show. So that is the benefit. And you also get to hear from other students who have been inside of Podcast Moguls. So that's the benefit of option two, which is deciding to make podcasting a priority and to get my coaching to know exactly where to start and what steps to take. So come on in. You can now join Podcast Moguls today. You can head over to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls, and I will drop that link in the chat for you guys. So you can explore. But you know what? Let's talk a little bit more about it before you guys head over. So I want to share a little bit more about what it is. So it's for you if you want to launch your podcast, grow your podcast, monetize your podcast, or just get coaching from me. So there are three parts of the Podcast Moguls experience. Part one is the course itself, which is a 8-module podcast success curriculum, which includes video lessons, tutorials, templates, swipe files, guides, everything I've used to grow. And it's on demand, so you can go at your own pace. Then part two is the community. So our private community is where you can ask questions and get answers outside of our group coaching calls, like in between calls. You can post your wins, you can post your challenges and get feedback. And then part three is the coaching. So this is where we meet monthly, just like we're doing now, except it's like, everyone on Zoom, you're able to see everyone if you want to come on camera. And we meet for coaching calls where you can receive personal guidance from me. So again, come with your questions, come with your personal podcast challenges. You will get that dedicated attention when you bring those questions. So this is our time to really kind of boot camp style workshop whatever's going on. And that I think is one of the greatest benefits, because it's not often that you are able to get that kind of coaching for something that you're doing. So this is the actual curriculum of Podcast Moguls. So module one, we refine your topic, find your perfect listener. Module two, we're positioning that podcast for launch. Number three, we are launching the podcast. Module number 4, we're marketing the podcast. So, how to grow your Instagram reach, how to grow your social media reach. Module number 5, how to grow your email list, which is so important. Module number 6 is how to market your podcast using advertising. So, beginner ads for everyone who is doing a podcast, you've got to know these skills. And then module number 7 is where we get into the monetization, how to position your podcast for monetization. And module number 8 is how we make the money, how we create our winning pitches, how we create our winning products. So that is the actual curriculum in the on-demand course. And I want you to not just hear it from me. I want you to know that my students speak very, very highly of Podcast Moguls. Case in point, this is Shirley McAlpine. She has the podcast She's Got Drive. And she always talks about the fact that when she joined Podcast Moguls, she had at that point maybe 25,000 downloads total. And in the 3 months of being in the program, she had double that almost. She had 46,000 downloads within 3 months. So that's almost double, almost 50,000. And so she says her strategy absolutely works. By the way, she already had a podcast when she joined. So for those of you who have a podcast, again, you're still in the right place. And those of you who are just starting, I'll share with you a few other students who are just starting. So Fritz was someone who was just starting. He says here, prior to the program, I kind of was doing my own thing, right? We love to do our own thing. And he said he was not really understanding how to reach out to guests. The program led and gave me structure to help me grow my podcast quite a bit. There were a lot of benefits to growing my podcast. It increased my brand. I got a lot more followers on social media, a lot of people reaching out to me for consulting engagements, AKA paid engagements. But most importantly, I've gotten a lot of speaking engagements. I was able to speak at over 5 conferences last year, even being flown in internationally to speak at conferences. So, for those of you who have that kind of brand aspiration and have that kind of speaking aspiration, a podcast is a truly powerful platform to utilize. And I'm happy to help you grow that. So, to break down what you're getting inside of Podcast Moguls, so you're getting the live coaching sessions, right? When you join, you have access to 4 technically. But honestly, I never turn anyone away. If you want to keep coming to coaching calls, come on down. I love just seeing people inside the coaching calls. But that is what's technically included, right? 4 calls and a one-on-one session with me. It used to be $1,000. This is what this rate is based on. So you're getting, monthly live coaching sessions, minimum 4. You're getting annual community access. I know groups where they charge annually 2364. That's 197 a month just to be in the private community. Especially after your first year in the program, they kick you out unless you pay that. I'm not doing that over here at Podcast Moguls. It's all included in one flat rate. You're also going to get all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits. Again, I paid $11.97 to learn information about pitching sponsors and things like that. And I still had to learn on my own how the podcast landscape works. So I've done that work for you, and I have compiled those pitch letters that work, you guys. And it's included inside of Podcast Moguls, no additional fee. And then you also get my guest pitch template. So as Fritz shared, he didn't know how to get guests, and I made that process way more transparent through my guest pitch templates. Plus, I also include the Master the Gram program. So if you go over to Side Hustle Pro on my website and all my courses, by itself, Master the Gram is $297, and it's included inside of the Podcast Moguls fee. And by the way, every time I update Podcast Moguls or I update Master the Gram, both of them are getting a refresh this spring. You don't have to pay again. You automatically have all of that new content for life. And then you're also going to get the Goal Getter Action Plan. So this is my mini program where I share my kind of 12-week year strategy of how I got things done, especially when I was side hustling. So I think that is a really key thing to figure out what your strategy is going to be. So I include that as well. And the total value, if you're keeping track, got your calculator out on your phone, is $8,553. I'm honest, I'm obviously not going to charge you that. I'm going to charge you the $11.97 I paid for a sponsorship intensive. I'm actually going to charge, if you pay in full, $9.97. Or we also have the for payment option. It is more expensive if you do the for payment option. But if you do the pay in full option, you are able to save a little bit and you do receive some bonuses. So, again, everyone, whether you pay in full or you do the for payment plan, you're getting monthly live coaching sessions, you're getting annual community access, no additional fee. You're getting all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits. You're getting my guest pitch templates that have helped me land amazing guests. You're getting the Master the Gram full program. You're getting the Goal Getter Action Plan full program. Plus, if you pay in full, you do get some bonuses. So you get the pitch email, the exact email that landed me my first $4,000 in sponsorship. You're getting my 5-day branding blitz that landed me in the top charts in week 1. These are the exact steps I did to come out the gate, just ripping out the gate, running up the charts with podcasts with Side Hustle Pro. And then you'll also, if you pay in full, receive my pitch email to Apple that landed me and my podcast in the new and noteworthy section. It was my episode with my Elite Teal back in 2016. And then finally, pay in full bonus, you'll receive my pitch email that landed me my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. I got flown out, a vacation and a speaking engagement. Whoop, whoop. So I'll show you how to really go about pitching yourself for opportunities like that. So now there's the full picture. Pay in full, you receive everything plus these bonuses: my $4,000 sponsor pitch email, my 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email for Apple Podcast features, and my pitch email for my speaking engagements. So that is it. And by the way, before we get into Q&A, I know that when it comes to money, listen, I don't pressure anyone to, you have to do what's right for your pockets. The only thing I will share is that I like to do this little would it be worth it if calculation, and I think it might be helpful for you guys to do it too. So essentially, I always ask myself before I invest in things, would it be worth it if? Just this, this month actually, I invested in a new Facebook ads course, right? And I said, would it be worth it if I could, reach more people who need this information and was able to make this money back? So that is the kind of equation that I do. And I also say, for you, would it be worth it if you could quit your job to podcast full time like Lori and myself? So Lori Tharps, again, is the host of the Read, Write, and Create podcast. She actually quit her job as a full-time tenured professor and moved to Spain in 2021. And she used all the lessons that she learned inside of Podcast Moguls to make a plan, work the plan. And when she arrived in Spain, she not only did she design a business, but then she launched a podcast using her Moguls training. And that podcast is pretty much a sales funnel to attract creative writing students and coaching clients. So those are the things you learn inside of Podcast Moguls that you really, it can't be overstated how valuable that is. Because a lot of times when people have a business and they want to start a podcast to promote the business, they're just so selfish in their approach. They're only thinking about themselves. Whereas if you really want it to work, what I teach you is how to make it about your listener. So now Lori is providing this amazing, helpful information for free via her podcast. And when she offers a retreat or any kind of course to learn even more, her listeners are thankful and they're happy to pay her because of how valuable they find her content. She didn't just make a podcast where she's like, hey, buy my course every 5 seconds, right? So that's how you do it. And that's what you learn. You learn that finesse and that technique inside of Podcast Moguls. Also, would it be worth it to you if you could land major sponsors like Google? So this is what happened to Tolu Ajayi. She is the host of the UI Narrative podcast. And Tolu, this is actually a screenshot from the UI Narrative IG. So Tolu started in Podcast Moguls with no podcast, guys, no podcast. She went through the modules and came up with her topic, her name, and within months was getting sponsored by Google. And at that time, she was still a relatively small podcaster, but because her content was so clear and because it's exactly who Google wanted to talk to, they found it and they reached out to her to sponsor the show. And that's what I want for you as well. And then she talks about her success with Podcast Moguls. She says, my success with Podcast Moguls has been tremendous. When I first started out, I was having extreme imposter syndrome and feeling like my voice wasn't worthy. Nikayla, she helped me overcome this. So Tolu talked about how, at the time she wrote this, she had like 12,000 plus downloads, which was insane to her. And she started getting invites to speaking engagements as well. She got a couple of companies reached out to her, and it just overall brought her joy thinking about all she's accomplished with UI Narrative, because none of this would have been possible, she says, without my direction inside of Podcast Moguls. So she says, it's the best way for you to get into podcasting because the results that I've had are bigger than I could have ever imagined. That in a nutshell is what I want for you. I want you to have results bigger than you could have ever imagined. Like, that's it. Um, Being a podcaster has given me opportunities bigger than I could have ever imagined. And I want that for everyone. And then finally, would it be worth it to you if you could surpass 100,000 downloads in a few months like Nia? So Nia posted this inside our private community July, a few years ago, when her podcast, Black Wall Street 1921, it's now been retitled to Dreams of Black Wall Street. But she wrote when she got these results. She said, nearly 2 weeks ago, my podcast passed 100,000 downloads in just 4 months. She said when she started this project, she didn't know how it would be received because she's talking about race in America, right? But the popularity of the podcast prompted BBC News to reach out to her, interview her, and produce a 4-minute short video with her narrating. Again, these are the kind of opportunities that come when people can find you because you knew your topic really well and you created a topic and a name that made it easy to find you, that made it clear what you do. And then when the opportunity comes knocking, you're ready. And this is what I want from you. So Nia also shared in her own words, I was not expecting my podcast to take off the way it did. She says, I could never imagine my podcast would do that well. And really it's because of what I've learned in Podcast Moguls. So again, that common thread of results being bigger than she could have ever imagined. And that's what I want for you. So this is why I've created this program, and this is why I hope that you'll join Podcast Moguls today. If you're really serious about your podcast and you want to start or grow your show bigger than you could have ever imagined. All right. So again, this is what you're getting when you pay in full. And when you do the 4-payment plan, you both get monthly live coaching sessions, annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Go Getter Action Plan. And when you pay in full, you'll receive these bonuses: the $4,000 sponsor pitch email, my 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email for Apple Podcasts, and my pitch emails for speaking engagements. So now we're going to jump into Q&A. Just a quick reminder of everything you're getting, the full value of the program. And now let's get into Q&A. All righty. So I am going to jump over to the Q&A section. If you have put any questions in the chat, and by the way, shout yourself out. Shout yourself out when you join so I can give you a woo woo. All right, now I'm going to go over to the Q&A to answer all the questions. All right, Leslie said learning a lot so far. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Monica. Monica wants to know, what is the best way? Oh, I'm going to turn on the fan now, you guys. All right, Monica, what is the best way to write the show description? Also, what are your thoughts on seasons with season themes? So when it comes to your description, I always recommend actually just doing a voice note, recording yourself talking about what your show is going to be about. And then listening back to that, then you can, upload it to something that can just, you can actually upload it to Google Docs and, have it write it out for you and edit it down. But that way you really capture the essence of what your show is about if you have trouble verbalizing it. But you're also making sure that those keywords are being highlighted. So things for Side Hustle Pro, like side hustles, Black women entrepreneurs, side hustler to full-time business, small business, and some of the guests that I've interviewed were all things at different points in time that I played up in the bio, in the description of the podcast. to improve discoverability and to improve getting in front of my perfect listeners. Oh, and then as far as seasons with season themes, I'm all for seasons. Just make sure that your audience knows what's going on. So over communicate. Over communicate. Hey guys, season 1 is starting here. Season 1 is ending here. Season 2 will be back here. Here's some rewind episodes while we get ready for season 2, which is coming back on this date. Make sure that you stay consistent even when you have seasons and you over communicate. Anika Green says, you've remained independent, correct? Forgive me if it's TMI, but what is your overhead? What are the expenses we can expect by independently podcasting from our living rooms? Great question. So I remain independent up until end of 2022. So I am on a podcast network now. I'm on the Acast network now, and I've previously been on the HubSpot network. Both have been wonderful networks. What are the expenses you can expect? So you'll need your laptop, you'll need your microphone, obviously. And I share kind of a high, medium, low options for microphones because I didn't start out with a really expensive mic. And I only upgraded to the mic I'm currently using, which, I'm sure you can see it's called Shure, and it's way more pricey. But this was my 5-year podcasting anniversary gift to myself. This was not the mic that I was using for many, many years. And I grew my show with my Yeti mic back here. So that's why I love it. Like, it's sentimental to me. But I started out with something even less expensive called the ATR 2100. So I'll link to that mic. And what you really want, you want a USB mic, a mic that plugs into your laptop. That's it. So as far as overhead, there's not a lot of overhead as far as physical space, but you do have a monthly fee if you decide to use something like a Riverside or Zoom. There is a monthly fee there depending on what package size you go with. And then any other platforms that you might want to use, it really is going to depend on that. Like if you want to use a service for your social media scheduling or things like that, but you can keep podcasting to under $100 enterprise when you're first starting out side hustling if you want to, after your initial equipment investment. All righty. Nicola says, is your perfect listener really you? Is your profile of experiences, interests, and no? Oh, I'm so glad you asked this. No, your perfect listener is not you. A lot of times we do start podcasts because we're interested in something. But that's why you do your interviews, because that makes sure that you're not missing any blind spots. If I just created a show each and every week about what Nikayla needs, as my interests change, right? I'm no longer side hustling. I'm a full-time entrepreneur. If I'm no longer speaking to Janelle, who is still side hustling, then I'm going to be out of touch. So that's why you make sure you know who your perfect listener is, so that you're not only focusing on what you're interested in, depending on where you are in life. That's why we do our calls. But you certainly will have things in common with your perfect listener because you wanted to start the show and she wants to listen to the show, or he or they. Zach says, what webcam do you use for your podcast recording? So I use a Logitech webcam, and I will link to that. And like I said, there are some updates coming, so I'll have my latest equipment breakdown coming. So that's what I use, and I started out with a cheaper one on Amazon before that. Anything that does the trick. Honestly, I keep my video quality to 720p. If you know, you know, because it really just it's really not necessary to be like HD for these videos unless you're planning to do a TV show. All right. Melissa Jones, on Riverside, can a guest use their cell phones? I wouldn't recommend having your guests use their cell phone. Nowadays, it's just such a poor listener experience. And there's no reason why, if they're busy and they cannot get to a computer or a laptop, let's reschedule. But the phone, the iPad, it's just not cutting it anymore. It's not a Zoom with your grandma. I want you to make sure your guest takes your show seriously. Okay. Tiffany asked, can you still be successful in podcasting if you don't want to be on camera? Absolutely, Tiffany. Absolutely. I really think that all of the clips and everything that we see nowadays is doing a disservice and misleading people about what podcasting really is. Podcasting at its essence is an audio platform. especially if you're thinking of going after advertising dollars. They are looking at the podcast audio numbers. Very few brands are looking at the YouTube numbers. That's a whole different ball game. So if you want to get sponsorship for YouTube, then they're looking at your YouTube numbers. But if someone wants to advertise on your show, the metrics that they're going to ask you for are based on listens. So you have to make sure that you prioritize audio first and get that to a good place before you do video. And that's what I did. I didn't start video until about 5 years into podcasting. Melissa says, also, can you use intro and outro videos and overlays inside of Riverside? Um, I believe you can. I have to check on that and get back to you on that. But if you want to do a little bit more robust editing, what you can do is download the files and then pull it into whichever platform that you prefer, whether that's Final Cut Pro, whether that's, I used to use, why is it escaping me right now? But I used to use GarageBand. So wherever you want to pull your files into, you can certainly do that as well using the Riverside files. Tiffany says, does the mic have to be an expensive one? I don't want to. No, the mic does not have to be expensive. I touched on that already. Just get a USB mic off Amazon at a price point that works for you. Leslie says, what equipment do you use to record? So I use a microphone. I use my Apple AirPods as my headset, but you can use any. I used to use a $15 headphones from Amazon, again, USB headphones. I use a ring light in front of me so that it's not too dark, because without the ring light it would be dark. And then I use my laptop, and I use Riverside on my laptop to record the actual podcast. Amanda Sabal says, you can edit in Riverside. Yes, you can edit in Riverside. The monthly price depends on the storage amount. So forgive me, next time I'll put the breakdown on the screen, but it's different tiers. Like with most subscription services, I think it starts at around maybe $15 a month. Derek says, what travel mic recorder do you prefer to take when traveling outside of your home? So I prefer to record out of my closet, but if I was traveling, I would just bring a smaller USB mic, like something like the Snowball, or nowadays, if you can splurge for it, there is a cheap, I won't call it cheap, it's not cheap, but there's some smaller, more portable Shure microphones. But I also used to use the ATR 2100, and what I would do is also travel with a kind of portable mini, you can put something in front of you. But you guys, the reason why I'm so passionate about recording from anywhere, by the way, and I can't believe I didn't mention this, is working at NPR and realizing that these journalists send in tapes and recordings from war zones, and they do all these different things to create awesome audio quality in the middle of people shooting outside their Humvee and all this crazy stuff. That's when I realized, you know what? We are overthinking this podcast stuff. So I used to put pillow cushions around my laptop just to, get that studio sound. Whatever you need to do, if you're in a hotel, get you some pillows, put your laptop in between it, to give you that cushion, to cushion, muffle out any external noise, and plug in your mic to your laptop, put in some headphones, and go for it. Do you recommend webcam for video? I do recommend webcam for video, Leslie, because the default camera on most laptops or computers are really bad, especially when you want to share that, if you want to share that clip later on social media. So use an external webcam, you guys. I even ask my guests to use external webcams when they can, but you can't control other people sometimes. All right, so just a few more questions and then we will wrap up. Thank you guys for staying so long, by the way. Amanda says, and let me know if you join so I can shout you out. All right. Okay, so coming back to the Q&A. All right, I have a topic, but there are other topics I want to talk about, such as mindset and inspiration. How do I weave it in without taking away from the main topic? Well, let me know what the main topic is. The way that I encourage people to weave in different topics that they're interested in is to establish at their core what their show is about. So let's take Getting Grown, for example, one of my favorite podcasts. Like they say, it's about adulting for real, learning to adult for real, right? Adulting comprises so many different things, but by having that overarching umbrella, they're able to weave in things like what we face as women, as we age and how we're dealing with our changing metabolism. They're able to weave in things like finances, because that's another thing we have to tackle as we adult. So establish the umbrella and then weave in the other topics into the umbrella. Make it make sense though. Don't, it's not a free for all. It has to fit. Tammy says, how do you connect to various podcast links to distribute it everywhere? So podcasts are hosted on what's called a podcast hosting site. Things like Libsyn. Libsyn was where I hosted for many years. I've since switched over to Acast, but you can still try out Libsyn. My code is Hustle Pro if you want to try it out for the first month and a half free. And once you are on a host, it will distribute it to the different platforms, but you will need to set up an Apple Podcast Connect account. You'll need to set up a Spotify for Podcasters account. But once you do that, you link it to your host, and each and every time you release an episode, it auto publishes to these platforms because it creates what's called an RSS feed. And that is what speaks to all those platforms. So once you create that, you're good. Someone wants to know, how large is this community? Is there a cap on the number of participants? No, there's no caps. There's several hundred right now. And again, this program has been in existence since 2018. So there are people who have grown, who, aren't as active anymore. So you never have to worry about feeling like you're not being seen, because every time we start a new cohort, you guys are the most active, and you guys are the ones that are coming to the calls. And so you will have my attention if that's what you're concerned about. Anonymous attendee also says, are the pitch letters recent? Is Podcast Moguls getting a refresh? Yes, Podcast Moguls is going to get a refresh, but the pitch letters are still effective. There's still things that I use to this day. So the refresh, so some of the things that and it's not like a huge thing. It's just I'm like gradually updating things as I go so that nothing's ever down or anything like that. But things that are evergreen are still there. They just might be rebranded to have, sleeker slides and things like that. So sleeker, like PowerPoint slides, Google slides. Adina says, random question. Do you still use Asana for project management? I recall this from the early days of your show. Oh, wow. OG in the building. My biggest hang up with my podcast is staying on track and consistent with episode releases. So I now use a platform called Airtable. And inside of Podcast Moguls, I share my workflow. So I show you what I use to keep track. So if you're OG, you probably remember I've tried a few different ones. So yes, I did try Asana. And before that, I was just using Google Sheets. I would just have like a spreadsheet of, okay, who am I interviewing next? When's that going live? Blah, blah, blah. Who's the advertiser for that show? And now I do it inside of Airtable, and I share it with my team, like my producer, social media manager, all those people, so that they always know like what's going on with Side Hustle Pro. Someone asked, Anonymous asked, is there one-on-one with you as well? So currently the $997 fee does not include a one-on-one. I do have a VIP option to work with me, which is a $3,000 option. So if you'd like to hear more about that option, feel free to email me at hi@sidehustlepro.co. Anonymous says, does this take into consideration AI? I'd love to learn more about what aspects of AI are you referencing? But yeah, AI is definitely picking up, and it's very interesting to see. I love using AI right now to help me with things. But I'm certainly, curious, what aspects of AI are you referring to? AI like ChatGPT for things like writing or show notes. That's been really helpful. And I have my social media manager actually use ChatGPT to kind of speed up some of that process. All right, we talked about the mic I use already. How big of an audience do you need to have before pitching to get sponsorships in the $5,000 range? Anonymous attendee, sorry, I don't mean to chuckle, but that's very specific. So inside of Podcast Moguls, sorry, I just had so much in my head at the same time because I love talking about podcasting and monetization. So there's an equation that all advertisers use, right? It's like your average monthly downloads divided by 1,000 times the cost per 1,000 impressions, right? And that CPM is usually like around 25, usually around 35 max these days. And so that equation you can just plug in and see like, all right, if I have, that needs to be average downloads, not just like total. So if you only have 5,000 for your show total, you got some more work to do. And if you want 5,000, then you need per ad. Is that what you said? Per ad? Hold on, let me go back to this question. To get sponsorships in the $5,000 range, yeah, you need several hundred thousand average monthly downloads. Okay, so let me know where you are with that, and then we could plug and play the equation. Jay, what are your thoughts of having guests and interactions? I love having guests. I have an interview show. Kendall says, is it really possible to pitch if you have just started and may not have downloads or social following? I launched in February and have approximately 500 downloads thus far. Congrats on launching. Whoop, whoop. So when I first launched, I would concentrate on getting guests that I know, people who I have some kind of relationship with or one degree of separation, who may have some familiarity with me, who'd be open to coming on my growing show. Because there was a time when I reached out to a guest and she taught me an important lesson. She said, circle back with me when you've been podcasting for 6 months, because so many people start podcasting and then they stop after 10 episodes. I think the average, they say for podcasters are like 10 episodes. And what a disservice to your guest time when you do that. So really show your record, show your consistency for at least 6 months, and then start reaching out to people. But start with really solid episodes with people who you know. Monica says, could a podcast about teaching people how to share their story and storytelling be a thing? Absolutely. There's so many books. There's one right now that I love by this author, Austin Kleon, and I still haven't read it in full, but there's so many awesome books about storytelling that all of us marketers and all of us podcasters and marketers and entrepreneurs need to read, because if you can't storytell, if you don't know how to explain to people who you are, where you come from, what you do, and why, you really aren't going to be able to get people into your world, your community, build a tribe. So please launch that podcast. Hey, Cece, welcome back. Would Buzzsprout be a substitution for Riverside, or is Buzzsprout just the host? Buzzsprout is the host. So some substitution for Riverside would be things like Zoom, Zencaster, StreamYard. So those kinds of platforms. Anonymous attendee, what service do you use for hosting? I'm currently hosted on Acast, but I was with Libsyn for the last 7 years, and I love Libsyn, still love them. And again, if you want to try them out, just use code HustlePro for the first month and a half free. Cynthia says, what do you think about intros made by other people, or do you think you should use your voice all the time? I think it depends. I think it really depends on the vibe of your show. Honestly, I don't think it makes or breaks anyone's show. Like I have friends who have intros that they created years ago when like having an external voice doing the intro was a thing, and they haven't gotten around to change it because why? It doesn't affect their show and they don't have time for it. And then I have friends like myself who voice it ourselves. So no, it's really up to you what you would like. All right. So Amanda, sorry. Okay, Amanda, you said your topic is on domestic violence. So what other things do you want to weave into it? So that's a very serious and specific topic. So you definitely want to make sure you're weaving in relevant things to not throw your guest off. Leslie, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot to include the deadline. Okay, I'll send you guys a follow-up email. But my next podcast mogul class is starting. The deadline to join is next Friday, April 12th. So it's starting right after that. Will there be a recording, Ariana? Yes, there will. Ariana, do you have any thoughts on Spotify for podcasters as a host for beginners? You know, Spotify for podcasters used to be Anchor, Anchor didn't have the best reputation, but Spotify for podcasters seems to be a stronger platform. So I would say if it's user friendly for you and you like the user interface, then go ahead and try it out. Um, as I've shown with switching from one host to the other, it is possible if you decide down the line that you want to switch to go ahead and do that. So if that's the platform you want to start with, feel free. I think when it comes to those kinds of decisions, who your host is, what you use to record, that comes down to a gut check, like what feels good, what do I like using, what doesn't give me a headache or intimidate me. JL says, do you have a recommendation for books to read on how to interview better or tips to improve interviewing skills? Ah, that is such a good suggestion. I haven't developed that yet, but I'll be happy to do some more research on those books and then also put together some of my own tips. Cynthia says, would podcasts that are short, 5 to 7 minutes, be frowned upon in terms of getting monetized? It would probably be hard for an advertiser to want to sponsor that. So what I would recommend is, number one, tell me why your show would be that short. Is it possible that some of those episodes could be combined? And if not combined, then have kind of segments. So a segment at the top where you talk about something and then you get into whatever the 5 to 7 minute core piece is going to be for that episode. They're definitely short podcasts, but they're usually within the range of 20 minutes. So when I was at NPR, we had just launched Up First shortly before I left, and it is very similar category to the Daily, that newsy top of the morning kind of breakdown of what's going on in the world or a deeper dive on one story, but stays within that shorter window. So keep it at least that long, because advertisers, they like for listeners to be engrossed in the episode to make sure that they listen to the ad and then keep listening to the episode. So that's one thing that advertisers love, like having that opportunity to get in between content that the listener loves. Stacy said, and these are the last two questions, you guys. So after this, we'll wrap up. I will be sending the recording. Thank you again for joining and for everyone for sticking around so long. Stacy says, thoughts on discussing adoption and foster care in the Black community. Podcasts exist, but not many with Black hosts. Absolutely, go for it. So that's what I mean by doing your competitive analysis and look at what else is missing from the conversation. Not just, oh, there's not a Black version of this, but what is missing outside of that? Is it exploring why Black children have a lower rate of adoption, and exploring some of the things that we can do to improve those outcomes, like really make it clear what your show is going to do differently so that you can attract those listeners. But I absolutely think that topic is needed. So definitely continue to do that competitive analysis to see what's out there and what's missing. And you said, got it. Thanks. All right, you guys. So with that, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.